Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be talking about some cool little prompts and tasks and techniques you can do to help improve your creative writing, in particular poetry, but really you can kind of use this for anything. A lot of people have told me over the last year in comments and emails and messages and everything that they want to write poetry but they don't always know where to start, or that they want to write poetry but they're struggling with writer's block, or I also get some people that tell me that they feel like they could never be a poet, or that they're not good enough to be a poet, or any number of things like that. And I get it, you know. Writing poetry, especially for beginners, is incredibly intimidating, and sharing it even more so. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't give it a good go. To me, poetry is probably one of the most challenging forms of writing there is, but it's also one of the most fun and creative and imaginative and one of the most expressive forms. It's probably the one with the steepest learning curve, but I feel like when you kind of get in a flow and you start working on it and you really kind of start to discover your voice and your style and what you enjoy, it can be brilliant. Really, when you start writing, or if you want to write, or if you feel inspired to write, it doesn't matter if you're any good or not. Because one, the only way to get better is to actually write and practice, and two, the process of writing poetry itself can be so rewarding that it doesn't always matter how objectively good or bad the end result is. If you're writing for yourself to enjoy it, to create something, that's what matters. The process is just as important as the end result. So with all this in mind, today I wanted to make a video of short writing prompts to help both complete beginners and more experienced poets kind of get a little bit inspired if they don't know where to start, or they're facing writer's block, or they're just struggling and want a little more inspiration, or they want to push themselves and try something new. So in this video I'm going to be sharing some of the exercises and little kind of tasks that I set for myself when I want to sit down and write something but I'm struggling a bit. Hopefully they'll help you a little bit, or at least inspire you in some way, but I also want to hear from you as well. So absolutely feel free to share your own ideas down in the comments below. Let me know what kind of creative writing techniques help you, what kind of tasks and prompts you set yourself, what you do to help yourself improve, or what others have recommended to you. It's always really good to share your thoughts and ideas, and I really love reading all your comments, so please leave them below. What do you say, Coops? Yeah, sleepy girl agrees. The first idea for a task I want you guys to do is to take a poem that you love and rewrite it in a different style. So the real goal behind this is to start to really understand the importance of poetic form and structure, and why things have a certain structure, how structure informs meaning, and why we choose certain structures in the first place. So take a poem that you love and have a think about why that poet has used that structure, and then try and rewrite it in a different style, and have a think about how this new style or form or structure informs the meaning. How can you convey the same meaning in a different form, or does changing the form change the meaning in some way? So you might want to take something that is traditionally a haiku and expand it by writing a sonnet. You might want to take a serious villanelle and rewrite it as a silly limerick. You might want to take even a song that you love and instead write it with something with a more strict structure, like a sestina or a pantome, for example. Also, don't be afraid to try out new types of poetic form and structure that you're not really familiar with, or that you've not tried writing in before. Stepping out of your comfort zone. So if you always write haikus, for example, maybe try something longer like a ballad. Or if you're used to very kind of strict forms and structure in your poetry, like say you're used to writing villanelles or something, maybe you want to go and do something a little crazy and try some free verse or something like that. One other recommendation I will give you though is, if you are kind of new to writing and you don't really know that many poetic forms, or you're not really familiar with them or their rules or anything like that, I really recommend Stephen Fry's book, The Ode Less Travelled. It's one I've spoken about in videos before, but it is a fantastic resource and a great little introduction to poetry, especially rhythm and meter and structure and form. It's a very informative but very straightforward guide, and I thoroughly recommend it. The second little exercise I want to recommend to you guys is one with the aim of expanding your vocab and working on expressing the same idea in new ways. And so for this one, what I want you to do is start with a completely mundane sentence. It can be a cliche, it could be something quite boring, but just one simple sentence. Maybe it could be something like, I watched a sunset, or she danced in the rain, or the flower was blooming. Either way, something simple, not complex, kind of dull. Start with that, and then rewrite it. Add in some interesting adjectives or adverbs. Maybe make it more of a complex or compound sentence. Maybe add a little bit more detail in there. And then rewrite it again and again. And each time think about how you can express a mundane kind of phrase in a more creative way. Crack out your thesaurus, have a look at new words, try and expand your vocab. Is there a more interesting way of saying danced in the rain? Maybe she wasn't just dancing in the rain, maybe she was prancing around in a torrential downpour. Keep rewriting this same sentence in many different ways, using many different words and descriptions, and also start thinking about things like consonants and assonance. Think about rhyme and rhythm and meter. Think about how you can add these poetic techniques into one mundane sentence to take a boring description and turn it into poetry. Have a think about how your word choice not only tells the reader what is happening, but informs them on how it's happening and how the subject feels. Work on showing and not telling. Keep rewriting until you get something that you look at and you think, wow, damn, that is poetry. And you can pick out a few of your favorite combinations if you want. And if you feel good about it, if you feel inspired, maybe try reworking that one line into a full poem. The third little exercise is a similar one in terms of working on descriptions and working on showing and not telling, but this one kind of takes it a little bit further. For this one, we're going back to the idea that I spoke about in my Intro to Poetry video called The Great Paradox, which basically refers to this idea that the more specific your kind of description is in poetry, the more universal it becomes. By which I mean, if you really want a reader to understand how you or your character is feeling through your writing, you want to show that through describing a very specific situation. You don't want to just say, they feel sad, or they were happy, or he broke her heart. You want to give a specific example. You want to describe in detail to show the reader how to feel rather than telling them what to feel. So for this exercise, I want you to come up with a little situation or scenario and have a think about how a character in that situation is feeling and what they're thinking. It can be something quite common, like, a person feeling heartbroken during a breakup, or it could be something a little more weird and out there, like a person waiting for a job interview, but instead of being super anxious, all they can think about is how hungry they are. Either way, I want you to pick a scenario. It could be something you're used to writing about or something that's a little more out of your comfort zone. And I want you to start making a list of ways to describe the situation without ever specifically saying what is happening. So instead of saying, he was waiting for a job interview and he was hungry, think about how you can describe that whole situation without ever saying those words. Think about the senses. Think about what the narrator of the poem can see or smell or feel, hear, touch, and don't be afraid to get specific. Don't be afraid to start making metaphors and similes and other comparisons and getting quite figurative with your language. Have a lot of fun with it and create a list. So as an example, for that hungry job interview one, like I say, you don't just want to say they were hungry but also apprehensive about the upcoming interview. That's boring, that's telling, that's not showing, that's not poetry. And you're not getting specific enough. It's far too generic. People will kind of read that and be like, oh yeah, I guess I'll relate to it. But they might actually relate to it if you start describing in detail what that person is feeling and thinking and experiencing. Describe the experience, not the feelings. So, for example, think about the senses. Really focus on the senses for this one, because this is a great way to do it. Take the sounds. Maybe this person can hear the clock ticking on the wall and how it seems to drown out all of the sounds in, the office or wherever they are. But the only thing louder is their stomach angrily grumbling. Or maybe they're thankful that they're waiting in a busy hallway with people bustling past and all talking, and this kind of mindless chit-chat in the background, because it means people can't actually hear how fast their breathing is and how loud their tummy's rumbling out of hunger and how panicked they are. Maybe think about starting to describe some of those sounds and experiences like that and how it relates to the narrator. Maybe think about what they can kind of feel. Maybe they have this hollow, empty feeling in their stomach, or are they experiencing slight stomach cramps and pain shooting through their body? And work on describing the waves of nausea they're feeling. Are they caused by hunger or nerves? If it's one or the other or both, how do you describe that? Think about what this person or character looks like. What are they wearing? And don't just think about what they're wearing, but why? And make sure you can infer all this stuff in your description. So don't just say they were wearing a suit, which they got new because it was an interview and this and that. Think about how through your descriptions you can infer certain things. Maybe their shoes are too tight for them and they're pinching their toes because they actually borrowed their shoes from a friend because this is their first interview in a long time. Maybe they're in an uncomfortable, ill-fitting suit or a too tight dress. Maybe it's because they borrowed the clothes because it's been a long time since their last interview. Or are they wearing a suit that's really well worn with a few little stains on at this point because this is actually their 4th interview this week and they're getting a little bit tired of this but they need to keep job hunting. Or maybe they bought something new for the interview because this is their dream job, or maybe it's their first ever interview. Think about how you can convey these messages about a person's background, about their motivations, about their reasons for being there, just through describing how they look. Without ever saying these things, you can use these descriptions to help the reader infer these things about the character or narrator or whoever without ever saying them. Like I say, these are just a few ideas, but in whatever situational scenario you come up with, compile a big list of descriptions and really work on trying to make it as detailed as possible and work on the showing, not telling. You don't have to go on to use everything you write here in a poem if you go on to write a poem about it, but having lots of options to pick from and really having a scene or a scenario kind of well thought out in your mind and on paper can really help. The idea is that you get used to showing things and not telling them. As humans, we infer a lot about people from what we see of them. We infer a lot of about situations from how we look at them. And you need to kind of stop babying your reader and just telling them everything you want them to know and instead show them what you want them to know. Because as humans, we're quite good at picking up on that stuff. It's just sometimes a little hard when we're trying to put it down in poetry. But it's very possible. And sometimes you just need a bit of practice. If you do this exercise a lot and you want to try and kind of like mix it up a little bit, and get kind of a bit more creative with your descriptions and things like that, I want you to have a go at describing some things where you mix up the senses. So take something that you would normally see, like a colour for example, and try and describe that colour by talking about how it smells, how it feels, what the texture of that colour would be. Or try to describe a sound by how it looks or feels. Try to describe a texture by what smell or taste it might have, something like that. It's odd and it doesn't always work, but it really does get you kind of thinking creatively and outside the box. And, you know, imagine trying to describe the colour purple without ever saying the word purple and without saying it's a kind of bluish red. Think about how you would describe that, for example, by appealing to all the other senses. You can get really creative and abstract with it and it can be a lot of fun, but it's also quite difficult to start with. So it's something to kind of really push you and get you thinking a little outside the box, you know? The next exercise is all about helping you develop your voice as a poet or an author or a writer or whatever. And for this, I want you to change up your narrator. A lot of people fall into the same patterns when it comes to creative writing of always writing in, say, first person or third person or this, or they always write autobiographical stuff, or they always write about fictional characters or whatever. For this exercise, I want you to take what you normally do, throw it away, do something completely different, the complete opposite. So if you always write first person poetry, for example, mix it up and try writing in second or third person for once. If you find you only ever write about fictional characters, mix it up, write about something incredibly personal to you, which can really be outside of your comfort zone, but can really help you grow as a writer. Changing up kind of like your narrator, your voice, your tone like this can really help you start thinking about the importance of even basic things like the pronouns that you're using in your writing, you know. Mostly here, I want you to think about the importance of the voice that you're writing in, right? So depending on who's telling the story, you will see things in a very different way and you'll have a very different tone to the piece. You might use different vocab for different people. So while you might look at a situation and let's imagine you're a very kind of like educated middle class man, right? But you're trying to push yourself out of your comfort zone and you're writing as a working class mother of 3 kids. How you might look at a situation and how you might describe a situation would be very different from how your character would look at and describe it. So have a think about how the language and the words and the kinds of descriptions and the kinds of comparisons that this character or narrator would use as opposed to what you would use. So while I might look at something and say, oh, well, that's absolutely disgusting, the character might say, oh, that's well ranked, mate. And it might sound silly and it might feel weird to get out of your comfort zone like this and use words and language and descriptions and even slang terms and make comparisons to certain things that you wouldn't normally do. It can feel silly at first, but it's what really helps establish a voice in your poems. It really helps build a character. It really helps develop the tone of the poem, and it can really, really help you stand out. It's also important as well, if you're writing poetry or writing that's written from different characters' perspectives, you want to make sure the voices are all very, very distinct, and you don't want them to all sound the same, especially if they're very different characters from very different backgrounds. So it's important that you know how to distinguish between them in the tone and the voice used. That said, if you're writing quite autobiographical poetry and you want to make it very personal, this will help you kind of narrow down and really, I guess, pin down your voice and your tone and what defines your voice in your writing. You want to make sure that when people read your work, they know it's you straight away from the language you use, the tone you take, even the syntax of your sentences, you know? The final little task or exercise or whatever you want to call it that I want to suggest to you guys is all about being a better editor. And for this task, I want you to take a poem that you hate and rewrite it, make it better, turn it into something that you love. It's sometimes hard to be really objective when it comes to editing your own work, so being able to be brutal about other people's work will help you start to learn how to objectively look at a piece of writing with no emotional attachment to it. Eventually you'll be able to take those same critiques that you apply to other people's work and start to apply it to your own a little more objectively. It takes some time, but it's really, really worth doing. So for this, you'll have to think about why you hated that certain poem in the first place, and then think about how you'd change it. How would you make it better? Can it be better? Is this a poem that you hate because it's a matter of taste or because it's objectively bad in some way? There are many ways you might want to edit or change it or improve it. You might want to add more detail, take away some detail, change the form, change the tone, even change the message slightly, make it more upbeat or more serious. Would you change the perspective it's written from, so it's from a different character's point of view perhaps? Would you make it longer? Would you make it shorter? Would you keep it roughly the same but just kind of move around a few lines and a few words? Would you change a metaphor here and there? Would you add more poetic techniques in? Or would you take some out so it's less flowery and more kind of relatable? Maybe you want to take a popular poem that you just don't really understand the hype around and rewrite it to make something you enjoy. For example, in a lot of my videos, I always use Robert Frost as an example of a poet who I appreciate as being a very good, talented poet, but whose work I just don't enjoy on a personal level because I'm not really into pastoral poetry. So for this exercise, for example, maybe I take a poem of his like Mending Wall, which is an allegory about friendship and relationships told through the story of a breakdown and building of a wall. Maybe I would take this and I would maybe keep the same rough form and structure, but completely rewrite it so it has a different allegory. So maybe it was about, I don't know, still obviously about like friendship and relationships, but instead told through an allegory about, I don't know, creating art or film or writing or something like that. I don't know, that's just an idea. So you could do something like that, or maybe you could take some kind of like generic Instagram poetry like we always talk about and write a more developed piece from it. So remember in my Milk and Honey review, we spoke about how a lot of the poems there have potential and they're kind of seeds of ideas, but none of them are really developed. Maybe you could look through a book or an Instagram account like that and get some ideas and take those little seeds of inspiration and write a full poem from it. Develop the ideas further and further. That's just an idea. But anyway, that's where I'm going to end this. I hope these have been a little bit inspiring and helpful for you guys. And if you do end up doing any of these exercises or writing any poems from this, I'd love it if you want to share them down in the comments below or over on my website, which is racheloates.me. There's a Fresh Poet Society forum over there, and you can just create some new topics and have fun and share some of your work with me and others, and go help each other out and give each other some advice and helpful, stuff like that, hopefully. I don't know, I think I'm rambling now. But yeah, seriously, let me know what you thought of these and any other techniques or exercises that you guys do to help you feel inspired and write more creatively. But for now, thank you so much for watching today. I'll be back with more videos very, very soon. If you're new here, please subscribe, that would be awesome. And yeah, thanks for watching, I appreciate you a lot, and I'll see you again very, very soon.